I'm a generous old woman. I've given my son and daughter-in-law more than they ever deserved, but for them, nothing was ever enough. Their greed grew until they wanted even the very last drop of my blood. Today, I won't hide their unforgivable deeds any longer. I'm going to tell you everything right here in this video. So make sure to subscribe, like, and share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. It was the cold end of November, and the kitchen smelled of roasted turkey and buttered herbs the way it had every Thanksgiving since my husband was alive. I had just set the golden bird on the lace-covered dining table when I heard Violet's heels click down the stairs. Her perfume arrived before she did, thick and sharp enough to cut through the warmth of the house. She tossed her phone on the table and looked at me with that familiar sneer. Are you trying to make some fairy tale scene? Nobody in New York eats turkey like it's 1980 anymore. Before I could respond, she grabbed the serving tray and flipped the whole turkey onto the floor. The dog barked wildly, tearing at it. Violet's voice was calm, almost amused. Let it eat. At least it knows gratitude better than you. Caleb stood by the doorway in his tailored suit, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor. When I asked, "You're really going to let your wife humiliate your mother in her own house?" he muttered. "Don't start, Mom. She's tired." Violet tugged his arm. "Let's go. Real investors are waiting, not people clinging to dusty paintings." The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. The candles flickered, and for a moment I saw my reflection trembling on the glossy surface of the table. I looked at the half-eaten turkey on the floor and felt a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't about the food. It was about something breaking, something sacred between a mother and her son. In the corner of the room, my late husband's photo watched me silently. I could almost hear his voice again. If they can't value what's real, never hand them what's priceless. I straightened my back, wiped my tears, and whispered, "They want to forget tradition. Fine. I'll remind them what legacy truly means. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a vow. I had led an empire once. Now I would take back command of my own life." In the old wooden cabinet, a small golden key lay waiting, engraved with the words, Atelier Mitchell. It opened the private archive of my art collection worth over $2 million, never mentioned in the will. I lifted the lid of the box. The metal glimmered against my palm, catching the faint light like a secret reborn. If Violet and Caleb ever found out, they would never stop until they owned it all. I tucked the key into my coat pocket. My heart was steady. If they see kindness as weakness, I murmured, then weakness will be my weapon. That night I drove my old car toward the Charleston shore. The cold wind howled through the windows. I sat on the stone bench where my husband and I used to watch the tide. The sea was silver under the moonlight, and in my hand the golden key caught every shimmer of it. I thought of Violet's cruel laughter, of Caleb's silence, of the messages from the shareholders warning me the company was collapsing. By dawn, the waves had grown violent, crashing against the rocks. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. In that first light of morning, I made my decision. They would inherit nothing, not the house, not the company, not even my forgiveness. Arthur and I built Mitchell Atelier from a single sewing machine in a rented garage on the edge of Charleston. Back then, we couldn't afford fancy fabric or advertising, only the long hours of our own hands. Arthur always said that honesty would be our signature. Every stitch had to be clean. Every customer deserved the truth. When our designs began appearing in boutique windows across the South, people trusted the Mitchell name because they knew what it stood for: quality over profit, integrity over speed. We refused to mass produce. Each dress, each suit carried the story of the person who made it. It wasn't just fashion, It was a promise. Arthur was the visionary sketching designs late into the night, with his pencil between his teeth, humming old jazz tunes. I handled clients' fabrics and finances. We were partners in every sense, two halves of one heartbeat. The press used to call us the moral spine of Southern couture. It made us smile, but it was true our brand was built on character, not wealth. When Arthur died suddenly of a stroke, the atelier fell silent. For weeks, I couldn't step inside the studio without feeling his presence in the air, the chalk marks on the cutting table, his glasses still resting on the sketchbook. But grief couldn't be my legacy. I carried on managing the company with the same principles we'd written together. Years later, the board called it an era of elegance, but they also whispered that I was too sentimental to adapt. They urged me to retire, to let Caleb take over. They said youth would bring innovation, that tradition had become a burden. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that my son would honor his father's principles. So I stepped down quietly, leaving behind not just the office keys, but a written code, a company memorandum Arthur and I had drafted long ago. I left it in a frame above the conference table. It read, "Fashion holds value only when it reflects the integrity of its creator." That sentence had guided every decision we ever made. But as I watched Violet's influence grow and Caleb's silence deepen, I realized those words had faded from their memory. They were chasing investors, cutting corners, compromising quality for speed. The atelier's soul, the one Arthur had breathed into every fabric, was being stripped away piece by piece. And that was when I knew this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about protecting what we built and reclaiming what carried our name. When Caleb took over Mitchell Atelier, the air in the office changed. The scent of leather and linen that once filled the studio was replaced by the sterile hum of computers and the glow of digital screens. My son, with his MBA degree and fascination for technology, spoke of algorithms and market disruption as if they were the new gods of creation. He no longer talked about fabric or fit, but about data engagement and virtual scalability. The first time I visited the new headquarters, he gave me a tour that felt more like a tech startup than a fashion house. "Mom," he said proudly, "this is the future. Real fashion will live on the blockchain." Violet was beside him, her phone always in hand, streaming their every move for her followers. A former influencer, she turned the company into a personal stage, champagne launches, rooftop photo shoots, neon lights spelling Mitchell Metaverse. She spoke in slogans instead of values. "Luxury isn't about craftsmanship anymore," she once told me, adjusting her diamond bracelet for the camera. "It's about visibility." Her words cut sharper than any fabric she had ever touched. They ignored the board's advice, sinking millions into a digital couture project that existed only on screens, no licenses, no copyright protections, just virtual gowns and tokenized logos floating in cyberspace. Caleb promised investors that the Mitchell brand would outlive physical material, but all I saw was emptiness wrapped in glamour. The accountants warned him, the lawyers cautioned him, but he waved them off, convinced that risk was innovation. 6 months later, the storm hit. The platform they built was exposed for copyright violations. Lawsuits began to pile up, and investors fled like birds before a hurricane. The same magazines that once praised the Mitchell legacy now mocked it. From handmade heritage to digital disaster, one headline read, "The Atelier's reputation, built over decades of sweat precision and honesty, crumbled in a single season." I sat in my old office that evening, the one Caleb had converted into a virtual conference room. The walls were bare, the mannequins gone. Only a small spool of golden thread remained in a drawer. I held it in my hand, feeling its texture, remembering Arthur's voice. Threads are like trust. Once they break, they rarely mend the same way. Looking out the window at the city lights, I realized how far my son had drifted from the values that built our name. They were chasing illusions, blinded by neon and numbers. And in that moment, I made myself a quiet promise: if they had turned our legacy into a spectacle, then I would turn that spectacle into their reckoning. That morning, the message came while I was watering the orchids in the kitchen. It was from Martha Green, one of the oldest shareholders of Mitchell Atelier, and a woman whose word had never been careless. "Need to see you," she wrote. "Private. Riverside Cafe, 10 a.m." My heart tightened, though I didn't yet know why. The sky outside was pale and cold, the kind of Charleston morning that felt too quiet, as if something waited beneath the surface. I put on my wool coat, tucked the golden key into my pocket as I always did, and drove into town. Martha was already there, sitting by the window with her cup of black coffee untouched. Her expression alone told me this wasn't a social call. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Riley, they're using the company's credit line to cover their crypto debts. If the IRS starts asking questions, your name will be the first on every document." The words hit harder than I expected. "Are you certain?" I asked. She nodded. "Completely. They're playing roulette with your reputation." I sat back, feeling my pulse in my throat. For a moment, all I could hear was the clinking of cups and the soft murmur of the river outside. The idea that my own son could gamble the company's integrity for digital currency made my stomach turn. Arthur would never forgive this, I whispered more to myself than to her. Martha sighed. "I know. That's why I called you. If you don't act now, the name Mitchell will be nothing but a headline." That afternoon, I went home and opened my old address book. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed the number I hadn't used in years. Jameson Reed speaking, came the familiar, calm voice on the other end. He had been Arthur's attorney and our family's protector through decades of contracts, mergers, and disputes. When I explained the situation, there was a pause, long enough to make my skin crawl. "I've heard the same rumors," he finally said. "I've looked into the ledgers myself. They're real, Riley. You need to prepare a motion to regain controlling interest before they drag you down with them." I pressed my palm against the desk, steadying my breath. "What happens if I don't?" He didn't soften his tone. "Then you won't just lose the company. You'll lose your reputation, your inheritance, maybe even your legal standing. The IRS won't care who signed the papers. They'll care whose name is at the top." After I hung up, I looked around the empty house. Every framed photo, every certificate on the wall was a reminder of what Arthur and I had built. The idea of losing not just the business, but the honor attached to our name burned like acid in my chest. Outside, the tide was rising, brushing against the garden wall. I sat there for a long time, realizing the storm had already begun, and that this time I would have to face it head on. I tried to reach them the only way a mother knows how, through dinner conversation and patience. Every few weeks I invited Caleb and Violet over, hoping that a quiet meal might soften the walls they'd built between us. I cooked the dishes Caleb loved as a child, thinking maybe the taste of home would remind him where he came from. The first time they arrived late, smelling of expensive perfume and exhaustion. Violet scrolled on her phone through most of the meal. Caleb complimented the food, but barely met my eyes. When I finally brought up the company, I kept my tone calm. "You might consider cutting back on the flashy ads," I said softly. "Focus on the craftsmanship again. That's what built Mitchell Atelier." Violet laughed, a thin, sharp sound. "We're not selling fabric and thread anymore, Mother. The world buys dreams now. Digital, not dusty." Her words stung more than she knew. Caleb shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Mom," he said carefully, "I know you care about the company, but you have to let us move with the times." He said it as if I were an anchor dragging behind his ship. I smiled faintly, pretending his tone didn't hurt. Moving forward doesn't mean losing your compass, I replied. But the words fell flat. They left early that night, claiming another networking event. I watched them walk down the driveway, hand in hand, framed by the cold glow of the car's headlights. I didn't know that would be the last time they'd accept my invitation. After that, my calls went unanswered, emails ignored. When I visited the office, whispers followed me like shadows. Martha later told me what Violet had done. She'd been spreading rumors among the staff saying I was interfering, that the old woman couldn't accept change. Some employees began to avoid me, their smiles forced their eyes darting away. Even the board meetings grew tense. I was no longer Mrs. Mitchell, the founder's widow. I was the relic who couldn't let go. One afternoon, I overheard two young designers talking in the hallway outside my old office. "She still comes here," one said, almost laughing. "I heard she tries to lecture them about stitching techniques." The other replied, "Yeah, Caleb's wife said she's controlling. No wonder he's stressed." I closed the door quietly before they could see me. My hands were trembling, but my heart wasn't angry, it was breaking. All I ever wanted was to protect what Arthur and I had built. But now, even my love for the company had become a joke. That night, I sat alone in the living room staring at the framed motto on the wall, "Fashion holds value only when it reflects the integrity of its creator." For the first time, I wondered if integrity had any place left in their world. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between grocery flyers and a real estate brochure. The envelope bore the seal of the Charleston Museum of Art, a name that had always filled me with pride. Inside was a polite reminder the loan agreement for the Mitchell collection, the set of antique paintings Arthur and I had donated years ago, had expired. They wanted to know if I wished to extend the exhibition or retrieve the pieces. I held the letter for a long while, tracing the embossed museum logo with my finger. That collection had been our shared joy, a reflection of decades of travel taste and patience. I placed the letter on the table, meaning to call them later. But fate had other plans. Caleb came by that evening unannounced, claiming he wanted to check in. He hadn't done that in years. While I was pouring tea, he noticed the museum envelope. "What's this?" he asked casually, already picking it up. I watched as his eyes scanned the lines, and something shifted in his expression. "So the collection's coming back, huh? I didn't realize it was still under our name." I answered quietly. "It was always under the family name Caleb, but your father and I considered it a cultural contribution, not a commodity." The next day, Violet called twice. Her voice dripped with charm. "Mother, I heard about the paintings. If you're thinking of donating again, maybe it's better to let us handle it this time. After all, it's family property." The word family lingered on her tongue like perfume. Before the week ended, she and Caleb started visiting regularly, bearing gifts and smiles that felt rehearsed. They brought flowers I was allergic to, gourmet pastries I never ate, and endless compliments about how youthful I looked. Every evening, there was a new text message. "Sleep well, Mom. Thinking of you. Love you." Words that had been absent for 2 years suddenly arrived in abundance. At first, I wanted to believe it was affection. I wanted to think maybe they remembered who I was before the company, before the money. But each time they mentioned the word collection, I could hear the clink of coins behind their voices. Their eyes never lingered on me. They darted toward the cabinet where my files and safekey were kept. Violet especially had a way of touching objects that didn't belong to her, her manicured fingers trailing along frames, her eyes glittering with calculation. That night I opened my journal. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock Arthur once repaired. I wrote slowly, choosing every word with care. "They don't visit to ask about my health," I wrote. "They visit to hunt." Then I closed the book, locked it in the drawer, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain. I knew what was coming, and this time I would be ready. They thought I had forgotten the things they once said, but a woman who has run a company never forgets how to read a person's eyes. I may have retired, but 40% of Mitchell Atelier still bears my name, and the art collection Arthur and I built still carries my signature. Once that name represented something pure in American fashion: honesty, craftsmanship, middle-class dignity. Now it felt like a chessboard, and my own family had started playing against me. After Arthur's death, I noticed how sweetness replaced sincerity in their voices. Caleb and Violet began visiting more often, smiling too wide, their conversations sprinkled with compliments that landed like rehearsed lines. They spoke of legacy of family vision, but their eyes never once looked at Arthur's photo on the mantel, only at the mahogany cabinet that held my estate files. Every time Violet poured my tea or brushed lint from my sleeve, I could feel calculation beneath her gentleness. She thought I didn't see it. She thought old age meant blindness. I kept notes in my mind, small but sharp. The way Violet lowered her voice in front of me, calling me Mom, as though affection could hide ambition. The way she told the staff during charity events, Mrs. Mitchell's stepping back soon will carry her dream forward. Her words spread like perfume light, pleasant and poisonous. I once overheard her on a call laughing softly. The old lady's ready to hand it all over. We just have to stay patient. In business, patience had been my strongest weapon, and now it would be my shield. I had negotiated with investors twice Violet's age and 5 times as ruthless. I knew the language of deception, the slight delay before a lie, the glance that lingers too long on what they want. So when she smiled at me across the dinner table and said, "You must be proud of us, Mom." The company's never been more modern, I simply smiled back. Inside, I was taking mental inventory, every false tone, every hungry flicker in her eyes. I spent evenings in Arthur's old study, where the walls still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. There, I went over old records, shared distributions, signatures. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. Experience had taught me that betrayal never arrives as thunder, it drips in softly disguised as care, and their care was starting to flood the house. I closed the ledger one night and looked at the golden key resting on my desk. My reflection in the brass looked older, wiser, harder. I whispered to the silence, "They think they know the game, but they forget who built the board." Dinner that evening was quiet at first, the kind of silence that hums louder than words. The long oak table was set neatly, silver gleaming under the chandelier. I had invited Caleb and Violet over not for reconciliation, but for clarity. They thought it was another family dinner. I thought it was a test. When the main course was served, I put down my fork and looked straight at them. "I'll be direct," I said evenly. "I won't sign any transfer papers until you both prove you can run this company with integrity. Not speculation, not shortcuts." Caleb froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. Violet, on the other hand, leaned back in her chair, a faint smile curling on her lips. "Integrity," she echoed. "We don't need moral checklists, Mother. This is the age of speed and vision. People don't wait decades to build something anymore." Her tone was smooth, confident, too confident. I could see in her eyes that she believed charm was power, that rebellion was sophistication. I took my time letting her words hang in the air like smoke. "Then perhaps you can show me what speed and vision have done for Mitchell Atelier," I replied. "The board reports say otherwise." Her smile faltered, just a flicker, but I caught it. Caleb shifted uncomfortably, setting his glass down. "Mom, please," he began softly. "Violet and I just want to move the brand forward. The charity fund is outdated." "Outdated?" I interrupted. "That fund has paid for over 300 scholarships and medical grants since 1998. It's the only part of this family name that hasn't been tarnished." The room went still. I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Violet's voice was lower now, edged with irritation. "So you're making us prove ourselves to earn what's already ours?" I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "No," I said. "I'm making sure you don't destroy what's already mine." Then I outlined the condition, clearly restore Mitchell Atelier's credibility with real sales, not digital tokens. Reinvest in craftsmanship, in people, in purpose. And donate a portion of the revenue to the Mitchell Foundation, the one you've ignored. Caleb swallowed hard, his eyes darting between us like a boy caught between two storms. "We can try, Mom," he said weakly, but his tone carried no conviction. Violet only smirked, her fingers tapping the edge of her wineglass. "You'll see, Mother," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our ambition might scare you, but it's what the world wants now." I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but I'm just testing which runs faster, your greed or your wisdom." The air turned electric. Violet's smirk vanished, replaced by a tight glare. Caleb said nothing. The sound of silverware against china filled the silence as I stood and began clearing the table. The test had begun, and they didn't even realize it. For a full month, they played the part perfectly. Every weekend, Violet would arrive at my door with a bouquet in one hand and a box of pastries in the other, her perfume drifting through the hallway before her voice did. "Surprise, Mother," she'd chirp, wrapping her arms around me just tightly enough for the camera. Caleb followed behind with his phone already filming. They called it a new chapter, but I knew better. It was a performance one rehearsed down to every smile, every angle. Violet launched her so-called image campaign on social media. Pictures of us sipping tea on the veranda, captions about family reconciliation, and hashtags like tradition meets. Innovation began popping up everywhere. She even tagged me grateful for my amazing mother-in-law, the heart of Mitchell Atelier. The post gathered thousands of likes, a digital chorus of admiration for a harmony that never existed. In every photo, my hand rested on hers, my smile faint, controlled. No one could tell that under the table my fingers were clenched tight. Then came Caleb's video. He stood in front of the atelier's old sign, his voice steady and confident for the press. "Mitchell Atelier is returning to its traditional values," he said, "inspired by my mother's legacy." He even added a montage clips of me walking through the studio years ago, shaking hands with designers, laughing beside Arthur. The headline the next day read, "Founder's Blessing Sparks Mitchell Revival." People believed I was about to transfer everything. They saw devotion. I saw strategy. At dinner, Violet's tone grew softer, her questions sharper. "Mother," she said one evening, swirling her wine, "have you decided who will be listed as heir to the collection? It's such a responsibility, you know. We just want to help manage it properly." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate and met her gaze. "No one has earned that yet," I said, my tone calm. "And I don't trust anyone who asks too soon." Her fork froze midair. Caleb coughed into his napkin, pretending to hide his discomfort. They thought I didn't notice the glances they exchanged, the subtle impatience in their movements, the greed flickering behind their polished manners. But I'd spent half my life negotiating with men in tailored suits who smiled while planning betrayal. Violet's charm was no different, just more expensive perfume. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording everything. Inside the picture frame on the mantel, just beneath the photograph of Arthur and me, was a small digital recorder. It captured every question, every false compliment, every slip of the tongue. I'd learned long ago that truth often hides behind performance, and the only way to catch it is to let the actors keep acting. So I smiled when Violet suggested another family brunch, and I posed for her next heartwarming photo. Let them play their roles, I thought. The curtain would fall soon enough, and this time the applause would be mine. A month passed, and the performance began to unravel. The visits stopped. The calls grew shorter. Violet's cheerful tone turned brittle like glass about to crack. She had expected quick results, a signature, a document, the keys to everything she thought she deserved. When none came, her patience ran out. One morning, I overheard her voice on speakerphone through the open office door while visiting the atelier. She was calling my attorney, pretending to be my family representative demanding access to the appraisal documents for the art collection. Her tone was syrupy at first, then sharp when the secretary hesitated. "Mrs. Mitchell authorized me," she insisted. "I just need the updated valuation for insurance purposes." She didn't know I was standing just outside the doorway. The lawyer, Jameson Reed, caught the lie immediately and called me directly. "Riley," he said, his voice tight, "your daughter-in-law tried to impersonate you for financial access. That's impersonation for financial gain. If you'd like, we can press charges." I felt a cold calm settle over me. I told him, "No charges, not yet. Let's see how far she's willing to go." That evening, I invited them over. The tension was visible from the moment they walked in. Violet's smile was gone. Caleb looked pale, his tie loosened his eyes, avoiding mine. I handed her the printed email record from the law firm. "Would you like to explain this?" I asked quietly. Violet's face flushed. "You're twisting everything," she snapped. "I just wanted to help with the paperwork." "You never let anyone make decisions. You control everything, every penny, every move. No one wants to live in your shadow anymore." Her words echoed in the dining room. Caleb said nothing. His silence was louder than any defense. I looked at her for a long time before answering. "A person who cannot stand in another's shadow," I said softly, "is usually because they have no light of their own." The stillness that followed was sharper than any slap. Violet's breath hitched, her hands trembling. "You think you're so noble," she spat, "but you're just afraid of losing control." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier rattled. Caleb lingered for a moment, his lips parting as if to speak, then closed again. He followed her without a word. 2 days later, I found out from a neighbor that Violet had changed the garage code at their house and told Caleb not to visit me again. "If she wants a test," she reportedly told him, "then I'll teach her what loneliness feels like." That night, I sat in my study staring at the golden key lying under the lamp. I wasn't angry anymore, only resolute. Some people mistake control for survival, but for women like me, it's the same thing. And I had survived long enough to know this was far from over. That Thanksgiving night, the house smelled of cinnamon-roasted turkey and quiet hope. I had spent the whole afternoon preparing the way I always had when Arthur was alive. The table was set with lace linens, the silver polished the wine, breathing softly beside the candles. It wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about dignity, about keeping the last ember of warmth in a home that had turned cold. When Caleb and Violet arrived, I greeted them with the same calm smile I'd worn for years, the one that hid everything I no longer said. Dinner began with small talk that tasted bitter. Violet scrolled through her phone as I served the turkey, her face glowing in the screen's light rather than the candles. When I placed the roasted bird in front of her, golden and fragrant, she didn't even look up. "I've stopped eating meat," she said flatly, setting her phone aside. "Ever since I realized you keep the family's inheritance like a cage. I don't want to feed on anything trapped." Before Caleb could stop her, she stood and with one swift motion tipped the entire platter onto the floor. The crash echoed through the dining room metal-boned silence. The turkey lay splattered across the rug, the scent of herbs and smoke mingling with humiliation. Caleb's face went pale. "Violet, please," he whispered, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just looked at the mess, the dinner I'd prepared with steady hands, now a pile of broken pride and wasted effort. And then I looked at her. My voice was calm, too calm. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You've just reminded me that some things don't deserve to be placed back on the table." Violet's smirk faltered. Caleb dropped his gaze. I stood up, adjusted the napkin beside my plate, and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard Violet mutter something about finally being free, and Caleb's trembling voice trying to calm her. But their words barely reached me anymore. That night after they left, I sat alone in the study with only the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator for company. The scent of burnt gravy still lingered in the air. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. Cameron Ellis came the familiar voice of my lawyer. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Cameron," I said, "prepare to revise all my estate documents." There was a pause. "Is this about the transfer, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked gently. I looked out the window at the dark garden where the moonlight touched the cold earth. "Yes," I replied. "I'm ready for another kind of surgery, this time moral." The wind off the Charleston coast was colder than I remembered. I sat on the stone bench where Arthur and I used to come every Thanksgiving after dinner just to watch the tide crawl in. Tonight, the sea was restless. Waves crashed against the rocks in heavy, uneven beats like the pulse of a heart that had endured too much. The salt in the air stung my throat. I pulled my coat tighter, though what chilled me wasn't the weather. It was the silence that comes after every betrayal, the kind that makes you realize love can be a dangerous currency. I unlocked my phone, its screen glowing faintly in the dark. One by one, I scrolled through old photos. Caleb in his graduation gown smiling like he believed in everything good. Violet on her wedding day, holding white roses that I had paid for her smile wide, calculated even then. And me in that crisp white suit, cutting the ribbon at Mitchell Atelier's new headquarters, pride radiating from my face. That woman looked like she belonged to another lifetime, another faith. Beside me, the golden key rested in my palm. The moonlight hit it, and for a moment, it gleamed like fire. It wasn't just a key, it was a promise, a legacy, a test. Arthur had it made after our 10th year in business, engraved with our initials, A&R. He used to call it the heart of the atelier. Now that same key lay heavy in my hand, not as a symbol of love, but of warning. I ran my thumb across its edge and felt its weight, the weight of memory of bloodline of disappointment. The waves roared louder, spraying cold mist across my face. I whispered into the wind, "I used to believe love could save people." My voice trembled, but it wasn't from fear. Now I understand only consequences can. The words felt like they came from somewhere deeper than anger, somewhere older. Maybe it was Arthur's voice echoing through me. Or maybe it was my own heart hardening in real time. I looked back at the horizon where the line between sea and sky blurred into gray. Every choice I had made, every compromise, every act of forgiveness had led me here alone, under the same moon that once watched us build an empire. I thought of Caleb's eyes, once bright with gratitude, now clouded by greed. Of Violet's laughter, sharp as glass, echoing in my home. The tide surged again, and I knew what I had to do. I placed the key gently into my coat pocket and stood up. The air was sharp, the sky endless. Behind me, the waves kept crashing, relentless, cleansing, final. I turned toward the car, feeling the salt dry on my skin. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but I could already hear it coming. It was around 3 in the morning when my phone began to vibrate relentlessly on the nightstand. The room was dark except for the faint light of the screen, flashing over and over again. 52 missed calls. Caleb's name filled the list. Then came the flood of messages. "Mom, please answer. The IRS is here. They're demanding your signature on the old audit forms." Another message arrived seconds later. They're freezing the company accounts. Violet's panicking. Please pick up. I stared at the screen for a moment, the glow reflected in the glass of the framed photograph beside my bed. Arthur and me smiling on the day we opened Mitchell Atelier's first boutique. The sound of rain tapping against the window, mixed with the vibration of the phone, a strange harmony of chaos and inevitability. I reached for the device not to reply, but to check my email. There it was, a message marked urgent from the board of shareholders. Mitchell Atelier's financial accounts have been officially frozen pending investigation. We request your immediate return to authorize legal proceedings. I opened the financial news app. The headline glared back at me in white letters against black. Mitchell Atelier stock crashes 37% in 24 hours. IRS investigates cryptocurrency laundering. Beneath it, a photo of Caleb and Violet at a gala, smiling for the cameras, unaware that the walls around them were already collapsing. I scrolled through the article, slowly reading every line, every accusation. Misused company credit lines, unlicensed digital transactions, fabricated invoices. Every sin I had warned them about now documented for the world to see. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time, a voice note from Caleb. His voice trembled, fragmented by panic. Mom, please, you have to help us. They're saying it's all under your name. If you don't come forward, the recording cut off. I sat still in the quiet that followed the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. I could almost hear Arthur's voice again, steady and unyielding. If they don't learn through guidance, they'll learn through consequence. My fingers brushed against the golden key, resting on the bedside table, its cool surface grounding me in the present. Instead of fear, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when truth finally does what love could not. The rain outside grew stronger, hitting the windows like applause from the universe. I leaned back against the headboard, the corners of my lips lifting just slightly. So I whispered to this darkness, "Karma keeps its schedule." And for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Not because the storm had ended, but because it had finally arrived. The phone screen glowed in the darkness, a single message waiting to be written. My fingers hovered for a moment before I typed the words that had been forming in my mind all night. Prepare the documents. I'm changing the entire inheritance plan. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the silence. It was barely a sentence, but it carried decades of pain, betrayal, and clarity. Jameson Reed replied almost instantly, as if he had been expecting it. I figured this would come sooner or later. I'll request a temporary asset protection order. They won't be able to transfer or liquidate anything. I could almost hear his calm, steady voice through the text, the same voice that had guided Arthur and me through every legal crossroad. Only this time there was no partnership left to protect, only the wreckage to secure. A few minutes later, another message arrived with an attachment labeled Revised Will, Draft. I opened it slowly. The document was simple, deliberate, almost poetic in its fairness. Every asset I owned, the paintings, the house, the personal shares of Mitchell Atelier, would be transferred to a charitable foundation. A foundation for elderly women who had suffered from financial abuse or manipulation by their own children. For a long moment, I just stared at the text on the screen. The cursor blinked beside my name, the same name that once symbolized power and legacy. Now it felt like a shield, one last act of defiance. My thumb hovered over the signature line, and I thought of Caleb and Violet, their faces pale under the weight of their own greed. They would call this cruelty, but it wasn't. It was justice, the kind life eventually demands when kindness is exhausted. Jameson's final message came through. Once you sign, everything will be placed under charitable trust within 48 hours. You'll be fully protected. "Are you sure you want this, Riley?" I typed back, "Yes. Let them learn what loss feels like." Then I set the phone down and exhaled. For the first time in years, the air felt light in my lungs. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped fighting to be understood. The decision didn't hurt, it healed. Outside, the first light of dawn began to spill through the curtains. The storm had passed, but its aftermath would echo through every empty room they once claimed as theirs. I looked at the golden key resting on the table, no longer a symbol of inheritance, but of release. For once, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. The first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains when the phone rang again. The screen lit up with Caleb's name. I hesitated before answering. For a brief second, I remembered the boy he once was, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the garden, the one who thought integrity was something sacred. But that boy had grown into a man who bartered values for profit. I pressed the green button anyway. "Mom," his voice came through cracked and breathless. "They're freezing the accounts. The IRS, the banks, everyone's locking us out. If you don't come in, we'll lose everything." I stared at the window at the faint shimmer of the ocean, catching the first hint of daylight. My voice was steady when I asked, "We'll lose everything. You mean the family or just the two people who turned family into a business transaction?" There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches long enough to measure regret. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "I know I've made mistakes, Mom. I was wrong. But you can't just abandon us like this. We're still your family." I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the sea fill the space between us. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said slowly. "I'm simply letting justice do its job." He tried to speak again, but I could hear the panic dissolving into tears. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the late nights of deceit, the forged signatures, the silent complicity. Love without accountability is not love, it's weakness. And I had been weak long enough. "Mom, please," he whispered. "We'll fix it, I promise." I looked out at the water, the horizon turning gold with sunrise. The waves moved in their endless rhythm, calm and cruel all at once. "Promises are currency for those who never repay," I murmured. "Goodbye, Caleb." I ended the call before he could answer. The phone slipped from my hand onto the table, the screen going dark. Outside, the wind carried the echo of waves against stone, a steady, indifferent sound that swallowed every plea. I sat there for a long time, watching the light grow stronger. It wasn't joy I felt, nor revenge. It was clarity, the quiet understanding that sometimes love means stepping back and letting truth deliver its verdict. When the tide rose higher, I whispered to the sea, "Let it all wash clean." The sun rose slowly, spreading a soft pink light across the Charleston shore. The waves shimmered under the dawn, and the wind carried that faint scent of salt and new beginnings. I stood from the stone bench, my knees stiff, but my spine straight. In my hand, the golden key gleamed, the last piece of a world I had once built out of love, loyalty, and illusion. The morning light caught it perfectly, casting a flicker of gold into my eyes, as if the sun itself wanted to witness what I was about to do. I closed my eyes for a moment. Behind my eyelids came the memories, vivid, cruel, and unforgettable. Violet's voice echoing through the dining room, dripping with mockery. "Stop these old-fashioned shows, Mother." The turkey crashing to the floor, the smell of burnt candles. Caleb's hollow laughter, the sound of a man too afraid to stand for anything. Each image burned behind my eyes like a slideshow of betrayal. Love had turned into performance. Family had turned into currency. And I had been foolish enough to believe that patience could heal what greed had already poisoned. I opened my hand and looked at the key again. Atelier Mitchell engraved in delicate script. The legacy Arthur and I once held sacred. It wasn't just a key. It was the symbol of everything I'd protected: the company, the art, the name, the dream of keeping our family together. But dreams have weight, and this one had become an anchor pulling me down. The sea roared in front of me, the waves striking the rocks, as if urging me to let go. I tightened my grip once more, feeling the cool metal bite into my palm. "You've unlocked enough doors," I whispered to it. "Now stay closed." Then in one steady motion, I drew my arm back and threw it into the ocean. The key spun once in the air, caught the light, and vanished beneath the surface. The ripples widened, shimmered, then disappeared as though it had never existed. I watched until the last circle of water faded into stillness. My heart felt strangely light, emptied, and full at the same time. The golden chain that had tied me to Caleb and Violet, the chain of guilt, of motherly duty, of blind forgiveness, was gone. When I finally turned away from the water, the sun had climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and coral. I wasn't the same woman who had come here the night before. I wasn't a grieving widow or a disappointed mother anymore. I was something sharper, steadier, a woman who understood that justice, like the tide, always finds its way back to shore. From that moment, I stopped being the mother who endured. I became the woman who would fight back with law, with reason, and with every ounce of clarity the ocean had just given back to me. The Charleston air outside was thick with early summer heat, but inside, Jameson Reed's law office, everything felt composed and deliberate. Golden afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished oak table where stacks of legal documents lay neatly arranged. I sat across from Jameson, his calm professionalism matching the steadiness I had finally found within myself. There was no anger left in me, only purpose. He adjusted his glasses, his tone even as he read the final draft. "Mrs. Mitchell, as per your instructions, the revised clause states that the entirety of your art collection and your personal shares in Mitchell Atelier will be transferred to the Silver Thread Foundation." He looked up briefly to gauge my expression. "The Foundation's mission to support elderly women starting their own businesses and protect them from financial abuse by relatives will be clearly stated in the charter." I nodded slowly. "Silver thread," I repeated, letting the words linger in the room. Arthur used to say, "Women our age are like silver threads, strong, shining, but easily overlooked." Jameson smiled faintly, then turned to the final page. "There's one more addition you requested. Clause 62, the no contest clause. If either Caleb or Violet attempts to dispute, modify, or delay execution of this, will they forfeit every remaining inheritance right. That includes financial assets, property claims, and legal representation through the estate." I could feel the weight of the moment, not as vengeance, but as correction. I had given them chances to prove their worth, and each time they had chosen greed over gratitude. This was not punishment. It was closure. "Add one more line," I said quietly, my voice steady. "In the event that they challenge the will, their names will be permanently removed from the Mitchell Family Trust." Jameson nodded and began typing, the soft clatter of the keyboard filling the silence. When he was done, he turned the document toward me. I picked up the fountain pen, its gold nib catching the light. My hand didn't tremble as I signed, the ink gliding smoothly across the page, final and absolute. As he sealed the papers in a folder marked "Confidential," Jameson looked up. "You know this will make headlines when it's executed. Are you ready for that? Ready for—" I met his gaze without hesitation. "I've survived worse storms," I said. "This isn't about pride. It's about setting the balance right." I stood gathering my gloves and purse. At the door, I paused and looked back at the folder resting on his desk. "I used to let them inherit my labor," I said softly. "Now I'll leave it to those who understand its worth." Then I stepped out into the golden Charleston evening, feeling lighter than I had in years. The morning after signing the will, I began the quiet work that power requires, not noise, but precision. From my home office overlooking the Charleston harbor, I dialed 3 numbers I hadn't called in years: Martha Green, Robert Lane, and Julia Holt. The 3 largest shareholders still loyal to Mitchell Atelier's founding values. They had all voiced concerns before, but this time they didn't need convincing. Within an hour, Martha had forwarded an internal audit report marked confidential for board review only. I printed the files and laid them across the desk. Numbers don't lie, they reveal what people work so hard to hide. Line after line, transfer after transfer, I traced the pattern. A total of $1.8 million had been quietly funneled out of the company's operating fund over 6 months, redirected into digital wallets, linked to an email address ending with Violet Walsh, Inc. Every transaction timestamp matched the same nights Violet had claimed to be hosting marketing campaigns and digital outreach events. When Jameson arrived, his reading glasses glinted under the warm office light. He flipped through the reports without a word, only pausing to whistle lowly. "This isn't just sloppy accounting," he said finally. "It's deliberate laundering." He contacted his team of private investigators, retired federal auditors who knew exactly where to dig. Within days, they matched the crypto transactions to unregistered trading platforms and connected them to Violet's personal credit card payments. I watched as Jameson compiled the evidence into a binder thicker than a family Bible. Receipts, statements, screenshots, bank authorizations, each page a nail sealing the coffin of their deceit. She used company funds, he summarized, to buy unlicensed crypto and pay off her own credit debt. And the worst part, Caleb signed every authorization form she submitted. I sat back, the weight of betrayal heavy yet strangely steady inside me. "Then it's time," I said softly. "Let's make it official." Jameson nodded already, reaching for his briefcase. "I'll file a temporary restraining order with the South Carolina District Court," he said. "Civil Procedure Rule 65. It'll freeze all company assets for 14 days while we initiate full litigation. No one will touch a cent without court approval." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the room, mingling with the distant cry of gulls outside. I looked down at the open binder, the columns of numbers like a silent confession. This wasn't vengeance. This was arithmetic justice, every digit, every decimal a piece of truth too precise to deny. As Jameson gathered the documents, I whispered more to myself than to him. They thought they could bury me under paperwork. Instead, I'll bury them with it. The cafe by the river was quiet that morning, the kind of place where the sound of coffee cups meeting saucers was louder than conversation. I chose it deliberately discreet but dignified. Martha Green, Robert Lane, and Julia Holt arrived one by one, each carrying the same mixture of exhaustion and curiosity in their eyes. They had seen the headlines, the investigations, the chaos. What they hadn't seen yet was my plan. I stood as they sat down, no tremor in my hands this time. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice low but steady. "We all know what's happening to Mitchell Atelier. What was once a legacy is now a liability." I unfolded a set of printed pages, the blueprint for what I called the restoration plan. I didn't beg and I didn't apologize. That era was over. If we want to save what Arthur built, I said firmly, we must cut out the tumor that's eating it alive. My words hung in the air like a verdict. Robert raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. Julia leaned forward, curiosity replacing hesitation. "You're talking about a full restructure," she said. "Board reform, executive removal." I nodded. "Exactly. Caleb and Violet have turned the company into a playground for speculation and vanity. They're running it into the ground. But if we act now, we can restore the core values: quality, transparency, and integrity." I passed around the new governance proposal, an emergency board vote removal of the current executive team, and appointment of an interim CEO with a clean record and strong ethics. Martha adjusted her glasses, scanning the document line by line. "You've already thought this through," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "I've had time. Pain has a way of clarifying things." For a moment, no one spoke. The river outside shimmered in the morning sun, reflecting the golden hue of Charleston's skyline. Then Robert broke the silence. "How much support do you need?" 66%, I answered. "To call an extraordinary shareholders meeting and authorize leadership removal." Martha set her cup down, the porcelain clinking softly. "You already have it," she said. "Between the three of us, that's 68%. The air shifted. Relief wasn't the right word, it was purpose. We weren't a group of retirees or sentimental investors anymore. We were a coalition bound by experience and the refusal to let incompetence destroy legacy." Martha smiled faintly. "Arthur would be proud, you know," she said. "You're not just a grieving mother anymore. You're a strategist, and you've just taken back your company." As we rose to leave, I looked out over the river, the sunlight catching ripples on the water's surface. "No," I replied quietly, half to her, half to myself. "I'm not taking it back. I'm rebuilding it." The invitation letters went out on a Thursday morning, crisp white envelopes embossed with the Mitchell Atelier crest. Jameson made sure each one was delivered by certified courier, not email, not rumor. On the top of every letter, printed in bold black ink, were the words, "Mitchell Atelier, Extraordinary General Meeting on Corporate Integrity." It wasn't just a meeting notice. It was a declaration of war written in legal language. Within hours, the news rippled through Charleston's business district. Martha called to say she'd already received hers. "It's perfect," she said, almost gleeful. "Short, formal, and sharp enough to draw blood." I could hear the faint sound of river traffic in the background, calm and steady, the opposite of what was about to happen inside the company. By noon, the calls started. Caleb first. His voice was tight, almost rehearsed. "Mom, what is this?" he demanded. "You invited press." "The Charleston Herald, really? Are you trying to humiliate us in public?" I kept my tone measured. "This isn't humiliation, Caleb. It's accountability. You should try it sometime." Before he could reply, I heard Violet shouting in the background. "She's doing this on purpose. She wants to ruin the family name." Her voice climbed higher, brittle with fear, disguised as fury. I didn't answer her. She'd never understood the difference between family and reputation. But Caleb's next words were softer, almost frightened. The letter mentioned federal legal evidence. "What did you do?" I paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to remind him of every decision. He hadn't questioned every form he'd signed without reading. "I did what I should have done years ago," I said finally. "I told the truth." Then I ended the call. As the afternoon unfolded, the company's internal chat channels buzzed with speculation. Employees forwarded screenshots of the invitation, some whispering about resignations, others about the possibility of arrests. The media picked it up within hours. The Charleston Herald posted a headline online, "Founding Matriarch Calls Emergency Meeting Amid Allegations of Financial Misconduct." Meanwhile, in the quiet of my study, I reviewed one final set of papers, the corporate insurance files. Jameson had prepared them meticulously. With one signature, I transferred the beneficiary rights from Caleb's name back to my own. It was a necessary safeguard, the rainy day fund that Violet had likely been eyeing as her exit plan. When the last form was signed, I leaned back and looked out the window. The harbor was calm, deceptively so. Storms always begin in silence. Tomorrow the boardroom would be full, shareholders, lawyers, reporters, and my ungrateful heirs. But for now there was peace, the kind that comes right before the first thunderclap. It was late the night before the meeting. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the soft hum of the streetlights outside. I heard the sound of tires on the gravel before I saw the headlights. Moments later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Caleb stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes bloodshot, his once polished suit now creased with exhaustion. He looked less like a businessman and more like the little boy who used to run to me after falling off his bike. But that boy was long gone. "Mom," he said softly, voice breaking, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to save the company. I didn't know Violet would—" He stopped searching for words for forgiveness. I didn't know she'd crossed the line. I studied him for a moment. His hands were trembling. His tie hung loose. Behind him, the night stretched dark and endless. "Caleb," I said finally, my tone calm but unyielding, "if you truly regret what's happened, then resign. Take responsibility before the world forces you to. I can help you rebuild your life, but I won't save a man who helped destroy what his father built." He looked away, his jaw tightening. Silence filled the space between us, heavy as lead. I could see the battle in his eyes, guilt on one side, pride on the other. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he murmured almost to himself. "Then this is your moment to start doing it," I replied. "You can still choose Caleb honor or greed, but you can't have both." He didn't answer. He simply lowered his head the same way he had as a child when he knew he'd disappointed me. I wished for just a second that I could take his face in my hands and tell him everything would be all right. But lies are luxuries I no longer give, not to him, not to myself. Finally, he whispered, "Good night, Mom," and turned toward the door. His footsteps echoed down the driveway, fading into the sound of crickets and distant waves. I stood in the doorway watching him go. The street light outside flickered, casting a pale glow across my face. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, but the cold acceptance that comes when love meets its final limit. I closed the door slowly, locking it behind me. Tomorrow, the world would see the truth, and I would be ready. The main conference hall of Mitchell Atelier was blazing with white light when I arrived, the marble floors polished so bright they almost hurt my eyes. Reporters lined both aisles, their cameras aimed like rifles, waiting for someone to fall. The red light on the broadcast camera blinked to life, "Charleston Business Hour Live." The banner above the stage read, "Extraordinary General Meeting on Corporate Integrity." For years, that word integrity had been only a slogan on our company letterhead. Today, it was a verdict waiting to be spoken aloud. When the doors opened, every head turned. I walked in slowly, deliberately, each step of my heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. I wore a white suit, the same shade I had worn on the day Arthur and I inaugurated Mitchell Atelier. At my collar, a single pearl brooch gleamed under the light. It wasn't vanity. It was memory and armor. The noise died instantly. I could feel the press holding their breath, could hear the faint hum of the cameras capturing every second. I didn't look at them. My eyes went straight to the far end of the table where my son and his wife sat. Caleb avoided my gaze, pretending to check his notes. Violet, in her silk blouse and perfect makeup, met my eyes only for a second, long enough for me to see fear hiding behind defiance. I took my seat at the head of the table, the chair I had abandoned years ago, when I foolishly believed they could lead without me. Beside me, Jameson Reed placed a thick folder on the polished surface. The sound of it hitting the table was louder than any gavel. Inside were over 300 pages of evidence transactions, audit reports, and signed authorizations. Every lie they thought I would never uncover. "Mrs. Mitchell," the moderator said softly, "shall we begin?" "Yes," I answered. My voice was steady, clear. "Let's begin." I looked down the length of the table, my son, my daughter-in-law, the board, the cameras. Before we discuss the company's future, I said, we must confront the truth about its present. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Violet's jaw tightened. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me, calm as ever. Jameson opened the binder and handed me the first document the internal audit stamped Confidential Evidence, IRS Liaison Copy. I slid it across the table. Perhaps you'd like to explain these, I said quietly. The screen behind me lit up with numbers, dates, and signatures. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence did it for me. For the first time, Violet's expression faltered, her painted confidence melting into disbelief. I sat there unblinking as the camera zoomed closer. Let them see me, I thought. Let them see what it looks like when a mother stops protecting and starts fighting. Jameson stood up beside me, his navy suit sharp against the pale light of the conference hall. His voice carried easily across the room, calm, yet cutting through the tension like a blade. According to Section 404 of the South Carolina Corporate Code, he began any misuse of company funds for personal gain constitutes criminal fraud. The words dropped into the air heavy and irrevocable. The journalists at the back straightened instantly, pens, scratching cameras zooming in. He pressed a button on the remote, and the screen behind us flickered to life. A series of bank statements appeared, transaction after transaction, tracing money from Mitchell Atelier's corporate account into several digital wallets. On the top right corner of each statement, one name repeated like a stain that refused to fade: Violet Walsh. The room erupted in murmurs. I didn't look at her, but I could feel Violet's composure cracking beside Caleb. She shifted in her chair, whispering something sharp under her breath. Jameson continued, his tone even, but merciless. The total amount transferred over a 6-month period exceeds $1.8 million redirected to private cryptocurrency exchanges. None of these transactions were approved by the board, nor were they declared in the company's financial disclosures. Then came the emails. One click and the projector lit up again this time, with words that no one could spin into innocence. I need another 50,000 USD for a quick investment. Don't let your mother find out. The sender, Violet Walsh. The recipient, Caleb Mitchell. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Even the reporters stopped writing for a moment, stunned into silence. Caleb's face drained of color. Violet's lips parted, but no sound came out. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the click of a single camera shutter, and then nothing. Jameson turned to me briefly, as if asking permission to go on. I gave him a small nod. He faced the room again. These are verified communications obtained through court-approved discovery. They confirm the deliberate diversion of corporate assets for personal and speculative use. The words deliberate diversion echoed through the room like a sentence already passed. I sat still, hands gently clasped in my lap. My heart didn't race. I had already mourned this truth months ago. Now I was only witnessing its burial. The cameras turned toward me, searching for emotion, anger, triumph, grief. But I offered them none, only clarity. This I said quietly. My voice steady enough for every microphone to catch is why I had to return. To save the company, yes, but more than that, to save their honor before it's gone forever. The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb shot up from his chair so quickly that the microphone in front of him clattered to the floor. His voice trembled as he tried to steady it, desperate, raw. That money was temporary, he said. We meant to reimburse it once the returns came through. It was an investment, not theft. His words echoed across the silent room, bouncing off marble and glass, sounding thinner each time they returned to him. Jameson didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his glasses, his tone as cold and precise as a judge delivering a sentence. You're correct, Mr. Mitchell. It was an investment, he said, pausing just long enough for the tension to stretch. But the evidence also shows that Mrs. Walsh sold 40% of those tokens and deposited the proceeds into her personal credit card account. The room gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. The sound of camera shutters filled the air like a rainstorm. Violet's chair screeched as she stood up. Her face flushed crimson, her voice breaking into a mix of rage and humiliation. "You're all pathetic," she shouted, her finger stabbing toward me. "You just can't stand that people care about us now. The world doesn't remember your dusty old brand Riley. You're jealous because no one worships the Mitchell name anymore." I rose slowly, unhurried, letting the weight of her words dissolve before I spoke. "Jealous." I repeated, my tone calm, but sharp enough to cut the air. I looked straight into her eyes, the same eyes that once sparkled with charm when she first joined our family, now clouded by greed. "My dear, you are not important enough to offend me." A murmur rippled through the room, cameras flashing like lightning. I continued, my voice steady. "I built this foundation with my husband from bare hands. You didn't expand it, you pawned it. You traded legacy for illusion, integrity for followers, and family for fame. And the saddest part is you thought that was power." Caleb's shoulders sagged. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The reporters turned from him to Violet, who looked around wildly, her mascara starting to streak. The walls seemed to close in as whispers grew louder, each one slicing through their carefully constructed image. I didn't need to shout. Silence was my weapon. I took my seat again, folding my hands, watching them both unravel under the lights they once craved. The truth didn't need to humiliate them. Their own arrogance was already doing that. The gavel struck once loud and final, echoing through the boardroom like thunder. The acting chair of the board rose and cleared his throat. According to Section 12 of the company charter, he announced, voice steady but strained, "We are now commencing an emergency vote on the removal of Caleb Mitchell and Violet Walsh from the executive board of Mitchell Atelier." The sound of papers shuffling filled the air, followed by the clicking of pens and murmurs of disbelief. It took less than 5 minutes. When the results appeared on the screen, the numbers spoke for themselves, 92% in favor of removal. Not a close call, not even mercy. A low gasp swept across the room. Caleb's face went pale as chalk. He stared at the table, unable to move. But Violet, she erupted. Her chair screeched backward. The crystal glass in her hand slammed against the mahogany surface, splintering into sharp pieces. Water splashed across the documents and my shoes. "You'll die alone, you bitter old woman," she screamed, her voice cracking under fury and panic. Every camera in the room caught it, the red light blinking, microphones hovering. It was the image of self-destruction, and she didn't even see it. I didn't stand. I didn't even blink. I simply looked at her and said evenly, "You forget, Violet. I was happy long before I ever knew you." The words hung in the air, calm and lethal. Reporters froze mid-note. The room went silent again. Even Caleb turned his head slowly, as if seeing me for the first time. Then came the sound of polished boots against marble. 2 uniformed officers entered through the side door, their presence quiet but absolute. One carried a folder stamped with a federal seal. The lead officer stepped forward, voice clear and procedural. "Under a temporary detention order issued by the United States Federal Court, we are placing Violet Walsh and Caleb Mitchell under investigation for financial fraud and corporate fund misuse." Gasps rippled through the room once more, followed by the rapid-fire clicks of cameras, capturing the moment karma in real time. Violet tried to protest, shouting about misunderstandings and conspiracies, but her words were drowned out by the officer reading her rights. Caleb remained seated, face buried in his hands. For the first time, I saw not a son, just a man, broken by his own choices. As they were escorted out, I caught my reflection in the glossy table surface, calm, composed, untouched by the chaos. I didn't feel triumph, only closure, the kind that comes when the truth finally takes its rightful place. Violet's scream tore through the room as the officer clasped the cuffs around her wrists. "Do something!" she shrieked at Caleb. "She's destroying us. Stop her!" Her voice cracked high and frantic, echoing off the marble walls. But Caleb didn't move. He sat frozen, shoulders hunched, hands clasped together like a child caught in the middle of a storm he helped create. He didn't dare meet my eyes. I watched him quietly, the noise around us fading, until there was only the hum of the cameras and the sound of Violet's heels scraping against the floor as the officers pulled her back. For a brief second, I saw my son not the man who let greed corrode him, but the boy Arthur and I once raised, who used to believe that integrity mattered more than success. That memory ached like an old wound. "Caleb," I said softly, standing. He finally lifted his head, eyes wet ashamed and lost. "My son, some lessons can only be learned when you have nothing left to lose." My voice did not tremble. It wasn't anger that spoke, it was truth, stripped of sentiment, clean as glass. His lips parted, but no words came out. I could see the realization settling in, not from the scandal or the cameras, but from the moment he understood that his mother's love no longer meant protection from consequence. Jameson stepped closer, breaking the silence. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, handing me a folder embossed with the company seal. "The board has signed the resolution. You're officially reinstated as honorary chairwoman and senior legal advisor." His expression was calm, almost proud, like someone witnessing a rightful balance restored. I nodded, accepting the document, though the title felt less like victory and more like closure. When I turned towards the exit, the flashes from the reporters' cameras lit the air like lightning. Questions flew toward me. "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you feel? Do you have a message for your son? What's next for Mitchell Atelier?" I stopped at the door, turned slightly toward them, and spoke just one sentence. "Kindness, when mocked, becomes justice." The room fell utterly silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. I didn't wait for applause or reaction. I simply walked out, heels steady against the marble floor. Behind me, the echoes of chaos faded, replaced by something purer, something final. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet weight of peace. Greed doesn't just take money, it takes everything sacred with it. That was the thought that stayed with me in the weeks that followed. After the chaos, after the flashing cameras, and the courtroom whispers, Mitchell Atelier finally began to breathe again. The board moved quickly to rebuild what had been destroyed. I refused the role of chairwoman, choosing instead to appoint someone who still believed in what Arthur and I once built, a young, brilliant designer named Emma Carter, who had stood by me even when it cost her promotions. When I handed her the official documents, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'll protect this legacy," she said. I smiled, something deep and calm stirring in my chest. "Don't protect me, Emma," I told her gently. "Protect the values that made this company worth something." The newspapers called it the redemption of Mitchell Atelier. Investors returned cautiously, the press shifted focus, and the company's reputation, though scarred, began to heal. But not everyone would recover. Violet was the first to fall. The court seized her assets, revoked her shares, and her name became synonymous with scandal. Fashion magazines that once praised her style now refused to mention her. She tried to rebuild her image online, but the public had already decided no apology could erase greed. Caleb withdrew from everything. He filed for legal separation from Violet, but couldn't escape the financial wreckage she left behind. The house in Manhattan was sold, the cars repossessed. I heard through Jameson that he had moved back to a small apartment in Charleston, living quietly, working part-time at a consulting firm. I didn't call. Not because I didn't care, but because sometimes silence teaches better than words ever could. As for me, I sold a portion of my personal assets, a few properties, some jewelry Arthur once bought me, and donated the proceeds to the Silver Thread Foundation. The same foundation that now bore the responsibility of helping older women like me, women deceived, dismissed, yet still capable of standing again. One morning, while signing a donation receipt, I caught my reflection in the office window. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who once clung to hope that her family could be saved by love alone. She was older, steadier, and finally free. Greed had cost them wealth and respect, but the real loss, the one they could never buy back, was me. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the horizon in soft gold and pink. I sat on the same stone bench by the Charleston shore, the place where months ago I had thrown the golden key into the sea. The waves looked gentler now, the air calmer, as if time itself had decided to forgive me. The water glittered under the sunlight, each ripple like a quiet reminder that some things must sink before others can rise. On my lap was a letter, the paper slightly creased from being opened too many times. It came from the Silver Thread Foundation, the organization that now held my heart more than any company or fortune ever could. The letter said that the auction of my painting collection had funded a new vocational school for older women, giving them a chance to rebuild their lives and protect their independence. I ran my fingers along the words, feeling something warm bloom in my chest. That collection once symbolized pride and legacy. Now it symbolized freedom. I smiled, realizing that sometimes the best inheritance we can leave behind isn't gold or property, it's dignity. A soft breeze brushed past, carrying the faint scent of salt and jasmine. I looked out to the horizon and whispered more to myself than anyone else. The sunrise today doesn't just touch the ocean, it touches my heart. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps. A young woman was walking with her mother, laughing softly. I watched them pass, feeling no envy, no ache, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop looking backward. The camera crew from the foundation waited a few feet away, preparing to film the short message I had promised to share. When they nodded, I looked into the lens and spoke slowly, clearly from a place deeper than pride. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, don't stay silent, I said. Your story, your pain, your strength is not a weakness. It's a guide. Share it, because your journey might be the light someone else needs to find their way to freedom. I paused, letting the sound of the waves fill the silence. The ocean shimmered in the background, vast and forgiving. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the woman who lost her family. I felt like someone who had simply found herself again.